Rita, go for it.
Okay, so my understanding of my assignment was to share a couple of things about the way I start my intro to human rights class, which I've been teaching for many years. Um, and I actually use this activity in a lot of my human rights classes because none of my human rights classes have prerequisites. So I can never count on students knowing anything about human rights. And I want to engage them right away within the first half hour of class, if not sooner, to start thinking about human rights and to interacting with each other. So it's sort of an icebreaker as well. And the first thing I do is wave around a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and introduce it very briefly. And then their assignment is to try and come up with the human rights that are in the UDHR. So I tell the students that I put them in groups of 3 or 4. They say that you should never have more than 5. Otherwise people are allowed to be too silent. And I mentioned that there's a list of rights from 1948, which is relevant, the date, and that there are people drafting the document came from many regions of the world and many religions. And there's 30 rights in here, and you have 10 to 15 minutes to come up with as many as you can. So they start brainstorming, and then about 5 to 10 minutes in, the class gets pretty quiet. They've run out of ideas. And I don't think I've ever had them come up with more than 10. And as Americans, they come up with a lot of the Bill of Rights, including the right to own guns. So then I give them a hint, and I'll say, the UDHR is divided into 2 kinds of rights. And I put the list I just mentioned on the board, civil and political. And then I make a column and say economic, social, and cultural. Usually they haven't thought of any economic rights, and they start wondering what social and cultural rights are. So I give them another 5 or 10 minutes of brainstorming. And then I have each group go put up on the board 3 or 4 of the rights they've come up with. And then we go around the room gathering as many. And of course they'll have some wrong. And then I make everyone a copy of the UDHR. I spend I think $1 on a booklet for everyone, and I grandly hand them their human rights. And then we go through, and I say, go through the booklet and find any that you did not come up with. And so then there's a lot of surprises, and we put more on the board, and they have to guess whether they're civil and political, economic, social, and cultural. And then we have a class discussion. What rights didn't they know about? Why were some of the rights that they put on there, like gender rights, probably weren't in the UDHR because it was 1958. The right to a clean environment, they'll mention invariably. And so we talk about the historical setting for 1948, what we would do maybe if we rewrote it now. And sometimes, so that's the activity in a nutshell. It generates a lot of good discussion. It fills the pedagogical purpose of priming them about what they do already know, making them curious about the UDHR. And then I go on to explain the Bill of Rights and the treaties, the subsequent treaties. What I would do now, because I've been reading Hurst Hannum's book on rescuing human rights, is really talk about the definition of human rights more, and talk about things that they put in incorrectly, or somehow I want to figure out how to add a discussion, because they tend to think everything's a human right. And we need to make that distinction between social justice and human rights, which I haven't done so much of, which is becoming more and more apparent that we need to. Yes. So I have another activity that I'll just briefly mention. The other thing I do on the first day is often, or the second day, talk about the state of the world. And I give them, especially if it's a freshman class, they're not very up on current issues. So, but I'll give them a pile of statistics, negative and positive, about the state of human rights. So I'll give them negative statistics that are usually fairly current about poverty, hunger, who's got shorter lifespans. And then I'll give them a bunch of positive statistics, like from Hans Rosling's latest book, that there's more vaccinations than ever, there's longer lifespans than ever, there's less hunger than ever, there's more education for girls than ever. And put them in groups again and say which of these are true, or how can they all be true, what do you think about human progress? Is it possible? And that generates really good discussion on the possibility of progress and change. And they're surprised to hear how much progress there has been over time. So each one of these activities I can easily devote 30 minutes to with class discussion. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get through the 3 presentations and then feel free to ask any questions, comments. Susan, would you like to go next?
Okay, sure. So just a little, I'm Susan Katz from University of San Francisco, and all in the School of Education. So the students in the Human Rights Education program here, we have a master's and a doctoral concentration, and the students are all they're all graduate students. So just to add that, many of them are teachers, some of them work in community organizations, so it's a range. So I teach a course called Human Rights Education, Pedagogy and Praxis, but I've taught the introductory course in Human Rights Education since 2007, where I taught the only class. So it's changed over time, but what I'm going to present is very much pedagogy focused, because we have another course taught by Monisha Bajaj that students often take before my class that focuses on the history and philosophy. So just to give you that context. But some introductory activities, I've pretty much done the same since 2007. So the first is to have students begin with making the personal connection to human rights. So preferably, I have students, there are 2 things that I ask students to do to let me know before the class actually starts on Canvas or website. And one is to describe very briefly a 1-paragraph description of an experience in their life where they felt either a personal experience of being a violation or an honoring of a human right, and to describe that experience in a paragraph just to get things going. Then the other thing I ask them is to what languages that they
Susan, you're frozen.
of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in multiple languages, whatever languages that they can speak. So we've had, one student did sign language. So we stand in a circle, and each student, we go around and read the 30 articles, and those who can read in another language, we have, I'm sorry, I should go back, but I give everyone a little booklet. I order them from now, I think it used to be the University of Minnesota. Everybody has a little booklet. So either they're reading from that in English, or I provide them the translation that they can read in. So it provides it's a good way of building community and honoring what the students are bringing to the class, as well as introducing them to the fact that the UDHR has been translated in every single language, including indigenous dialects. So I really love, that's a modification, by the way, of an activity from the World as It Could Be's curriculum. So that is that. So with the personal experience, so wait, let me go back a second, sorry. So they've written about their personal experience. After we do the choral reading, I asked them, first of all, to reflect on the different articles, and if anything is new or surprising to them. And it depends. Different years we'll have different discussions about who was at the table during the signing of the UDHR and so on. But the important thing is that I want them to connect what they wrote about in their personal experience and what they're reading in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So a follow-up of writing their personal narrative is to make a connection with a particular article in the UDHR articles. And then I have, for a following class, they write up their story, they write up their narrative, develop it a little further from what they did before, bring it to class, and then I have them meet in groups and they share theirs. Often they can bring an artifact that reflects this personal experience. It could be a photograph or an object. And then in groups, they decide which one of the experiences they're going to act out. And then they decide so that they're, say, a group of 4 is only going to be acting out one of the experiences. And then we do warm-up theater of the oppressed activities, and they act them out for the whole class. And we discuss them because many of them, for example, are experiences of students whose family came to the US, crossed the border. They're focusing on immigration. Others might be an experience that they witnessed. They were not personally experiencing a violation, but they witnessed a violation. So we talk about the different positionalities in regard to human rights experiences, and both the honoring and the violation. So that's a way that I have used to be able to develop that personal connection. So is that 5 minutes? I mean, I introduced a number of ideas, so I'd say mainly, just to summarize, the first is making that personal connection by writing a narrative of an experience, and the second is the multilingual choral reading of the UDHR, which leads into different discussions. I just wanted to end with one more thing. Even though I'm starting with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I always include in this course a case study on Indigenous rights. And we look very closely at the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and then compare that to the Universal Declaration, which brings up a lot of issues around individual rights versus collective rights, land rights, and so on. So I think that I'm trying to do a lot more where it's not the base of the foundation of the class is not just the UDHR. So, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, so I'm going to present the last presentation, and I will say this is an activity that I have done with high school students, with college students, undergrad, graduate students. I've done it at Columbia University, at University of Connecticut, community college students. So it really works for all different audiences. I've even done it in workshops with academics who are mixed with non-academics. So you can really adapt this to different audiences. So this is an activity called Ideal Community, and the goal, it's the very first thing that I do with the students. And the goal is, there's a few goals. First, I want to demonstrate education about, through, and for human rights. So about being the knowledge, through being respecting everyone's knowledge and what they bring into the classroom, and respecting every person in the room. And for, which is the advocacy part of human rights. How do you advocate for your rights and the rights of others? I also like to make that personal connection, showing them that they already interact with human rights and human rights violations in their daily lives, how what they're about to learn really applies to their daily lives. And it really sets up the tone for the rest of the class that this is really going to be interactive, and we're drawing on all the knowledge that people bring into the room and their prior experiences. So what we do is we have the students get into groups of 5, and the students themselves have really helped me to change and improve this lesson throughout the years. And one of the things, the first thing I do is I say, you get into a group of 5 and choose a community that you all have in common. It could be a city, a state, a dorm, the world, if you can't find anything else you have in common. And the students really started getting creative. Sometimes they did, well, we're all female, or we're all from another country, or we're all second-generation immigrants, something like that. So they really, improved the lesson with their own creativity. So once they come up with their community, they then think about what they like about the community, positive aspects about the community, and then what they would like to change. So negative aspects, things like that. So I have a little example, and then so they write it down. This is a community that is near and dear to my heart, New York City. So you can see, and then I lived there for a long time. So in the green over here, they put what they like about it. So diversity, green space, subway system, acceptance of differences, and food choices. And then in the blue over here, you have expensive housing. These are the negatives. Pollution, also the subway. So some can be both positive and negative. Discrimination, as well as acceptance, and food deserts, where there's not healthy food. So they all come up with this, and then after they do that, I ask them to choose one of the negatives and come up with a strategy to create change. So let's say they chose expensive housing. So then I have them think about who would they need to contact to try to create change, who needs to be informed, what information do they need to get, how do they get it, who has the power to do what they want to be done, for example, and ask them to get specific. And so this is a short lesson, so they're not going to come up with a full, fledged advocacy strategy, but it's to give them a taste of, first, to point out to them that they're already pointing out human rights and human rights violations. So when they say they have a subway system, their right to move, green space, the right to healthy living, food choices, adequate standard of living. When they say expensive housing, that's a right that's being violated. So we talk about how human rights and human rights violations are already playing out in their daily lives. And then we talk about the strategies that they came up with. And I say, well, you've just started a human rights campaign, a strategy to create change. And so I find that it's a great launching point for students to then look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and say, yeah, we've just talked about this without ever seeing this document before. So I really like to start that way, and so that it really gets to all different parts of human rights education and sets up the class to be very interactive and having people really participate throughout.